Good evening. I have to wait till my cameraman says I'm wrong. We're on. Okay. Tonight, we'll have our CEPTA meeting. We have a special guest, which is great. I'm just going to go over a couple things. And I guess first off, if I could start maybe just with the pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, thank you very much. Good, we got a pretty decent showing tonight. First thing again, just for those that haven't been here before, restrooms are right over here. You have to, there's coffee and hot water for tea and cold water over there, and then we'll have goodies afterwards after the meeting for a meet and greet. Our next thing for next month is just a members Christmas party, and I do have some information here on different menus that we'll have to look over and talk about. And again, all these things are recorded, and we'll put them up on our CEPTA site so that anybody can check them out whenever they want to in the future. I'll probably have that up maybe by Friday or so, so that if anybody wants, spread it around, let them know, and they can go on and check things out. This is going to be a very good talk that we're going to have. And I'd like to talk about for the question and answer period. We'd just like to really try to nail it down to just questions. We don't need to know your ideological feelings. We just want a lot of information to go out for everybody. And this is the person that can give you what's going on with the governor's budget right now. And hopefully we can find out differences between the legislators and the governors, and a couple other things that we'll go over, and I'll let her pick what she wants to do that way. She has a PowerPoint presentation that she'd like to give. So when the question and answer period comes, Giovanni and myself will have the microphones. We'll probably be on either side. Somebody has a question, please just raise your hand. We'll bring the microphones over to you. If you wouldn't mind using them, because for the recording it helps. So if you could just be patient, we'll get the mic to you, and then you can ask your question, and then we'll get the answers, and we'll proceed like that. I appreciate everybody's holding to that. And now I'd just like to, well, let's see, what do I have written here? It's a great opportunity to ask questions on the budget. And as you know, there was actually going to be a Senate vote, full Senate vote on like property tax elimination, supposedly sometime this week. And I just found out that they postponed it for a week. Well, I mean, this could be good. I mean, with a talk like this, a discussion, this gets more information out, real stuff, that you can go by. So to help you solidify what's going on. So this is not bad. I do have some papers here that have every senator on it. You want to give them a call afterwards, tell them how you feel, one way or the other. Here's some information. We'll have some on our site too. Easy to click for emails and whatever. And right now there's phone numbers on there. So please do some action. That's what everybody needs you to do. Let them know how you feel. Okay, and with that, I would like to just introduce Sharon Ward. She's the director of the governor's budget office. And I'm going to pass the rest of the meeting off to her.
Hi. Ooh, that does work. Great. Wonders of technology. Thank you so much, John, for inviting me, and thanks all of you for coming out. I know it's harder to go out now that the days are getting a lot shorter, and it's much easier to just stay home. And I appreciate you doing that, coming out and hearing a little bit about the budget. And I'm sorry to say that I'm here still talking about this year's budget in November, but I can tell you that we're making progress, and I believe we have I'll tell you a little bit about the budget framework that's in place and what that might mean for you and for Pennsylvania. So I told my husband that I was coming to Emmaus, and he told me that he lived here at one point. His first job was literally the first job out of college was writing for the Bethlehem paper. And he lived here for about a year. And then he went down to Bucks County and worked. And then he went and worked in the city of Philadelphia. So he said, I lived in Emmaus Borough, and say hello for me. So that's what I'm doing. So I do want to tell you that that we're confident that we have the framework for a budget agreement that involves a set of compromises on behalf of all of the parties, but also really makes progress on 4 issues that have really eluded governors and legislators in prior years. One of them is obviously education funding. The second is property tax. The third is pension reform, and the fourth is liquor reform. So you have been reading and hearing about these issues for years. The General Assembly has been addressing these issues for years, seemingly without a resolution. And I think we can say that the budget framework that's in place this year is going to address all of those issues in ways that are going to accomplish what the governor's goals, and I think, which we think are really critical, his goals for Pennsylvania, as well as acknowledging and recognizing the goals that the legislature has set and their priorities. So I want to talk to you a little bit just about what the governor aims to do. And, because you're probably asking yourself, why are we sitting here in November without a budget? And couldn't these guys just compromise early on? But the governor has really ambitious goals for Pennsylvania, and I think goals that probably most of you would share. I mean, obviously, what he wants to do is to improve the business climate and create jobs. And there are many ways of doing that he's proposed and he's working for. One of them is to reform business taxes. He has proposed, and I think this budget will end a business tax, a capital stock and franchise tax that a lot of businesses don't like. At the same time, the governor is working towards closing corporate tax loopholes. They are bad. They are, we prefer to level the playing field. And also, his goal is to use some of those dollars to further improve the competitiveness of Pennsylvania in terms of its tax structure. The governor wants to partner with local communities to make investments. One of the things that's happened over the past couple of years is that state funds that work with local dollars to help stimulate investment, revitalize downtowns, bring in new businesses, many of those have dried up. And so what the governor would like to do is to restore those partnerships. They really do make a difference, and I think you've seen that in a lot of the development around here, although some of the proposals have been more controversial, or the methods have been more controversial than others. The second thing that the governor was really serious about, and frankly, one of the things that when I went to work for him, was really surprised about, was how strongly he feels about property tax reform. And it really comes from his heart. It comes from his experience. He is he'll say, a guy from York. He was very active in the community. He was involved in many, many organizations and worked very hard to revitalize its schools, to revitalize its downtown, to bring people in. And one of the lessons from that for him was high property taxes in the city of York were really problematic, and that it made housing unaffordable. It, stimulated and added to the decline that you saw, and it just made it hard for York to be a place that people wanted to live. And so the property tax relief plan that he had proposed, which I want to talk a little bit about, really has its center, let's reduce property taxes in the highest taxed and the lowest wealth communities where it's going to make the most difference. And he really does believe that places that may have lower property values but now would also have lower property taxes are places where people would want to live, people would want to buy houses, and could really serve as one of the ways that you could stimulate growth in those communities. The other thing that the governor was really serious about, and I know all of you have read about this over the past number of years, has been doing something to restore the cuts that were made to education. There were significant cuts that were made in the dollars that went to the classrooms. And the goal has been to restore those cuts, to put money back in the classroom where it belongs. And it's a very high priority. But to do so, and I think this is the other thing that I want to reinforce, is that the governor really does want to do things differently. And so he sees additional funding for education as something that needs to come with additional accountability. And that means accountability for schools, accountability for school personnel, and also accountability for students in all of that. And that's for public schools and also for charter schools. And there are a number of things that we'd like to do to address that. The governor really wants to make career education a central part of our educational system for secondary schools. He believes that you should be able to go to a technical or vocational high school, get a certificate, and go out in the workforce and get a job. And he believes that parents and students don't understand or know enough about the fact that there are many occupations and jobs that don't require a 4-year degree, and many that don't even require a 2-year degree, but they're good jobs, good paying jobs. There are things that are here, and it really reinforces one of his major goals, as he wants to be the governor in a state where kids don't need to leave to get a job. He wants his kids and our kids and my kids and your kids and grandchildren to be able to stay in the community where they grew up and have a good paying job and keep their roots. Whoops, I did it the wrong way. So I'm just going to do that. So this is the governor's proposal for property tax relief, and I'm just putting it up here because this is not what we have, but it's the starting point, and this is where we started, and this is where we would like to go. I mean, the governor proposed property tax relief about $3.8 billion that would start next fall, because we need to raise the money to do that. It would provide more than $1,000 in property tax relief for the average homeowner and reduce property taxes by 50%. By doing this, we would completely eliminate property taxes for about 1/3 of all senior households. And again, one of the things that we're debating right now is, where do you target property tax relief? Our proposal has been to target it to high tax and lower wealth communities. Everyone would get relief, but those communities would get even more. You want to drive the relief to where it needs to be. And we proposed also providing property tax relief to renters. There are many, many states that have some form of property tax relief that also goes to renters. Right now, our program is limited to seniors. Working families, young people also are burdened with high rents that may be related to their property taxes. And so the goal would be to help them as well. And finally, in the budget, I mean, there's the property tax side and then there's the spending side. And so what I did here was pull out what some of our proposals would mean in dollar terms for, and I didn't want to go into school district by school district, but I did it by county for Lehigh and Northampton County. And I have 5 things in here. Property tax relief, what the value would be, $120 million in Lehigh and almost $100 million in Northampton County. Millage rate reduction, that means in addition to homestead relief, there would be an overall tax rate reduction for other property tax owners, not just homesteads and farmsteads or homes and farms. $11 million in basic education and special education funding, some reduction in reform in the way we fund cyber charter schools, which I think everyone agrees is a problem, and then some funding for human services. And why does the spending side mean, why does this matter if you're concerned about property taxes? Well, it does for one simple reason. In Harrisburg, basically the point of view is, we don't want to raise anyone's taxes, but we're happy when the locals will do it for us. And so what that means across the board is more mandates, necessary programs, but then walking away from the financial responsibility to pay for those programs. And so with property tax relief, with special ed and basic education funding, by reducing the excess that we're paying to cyber charter schools, and by restoring funds to human services that counties have been forced to pick up the bill for over the past couple of years, we're taking, in addition to providing services, now people can disagree over whether or not we need the services, but I think, from our perspective, we think we need money for homeless vets, we need money for, children with intellectual disabilities, we need money for drug and alcohol services, but we want to do it in a way that brings the burden back to the state and takes the burden as much as we possibly can off of local taxpayers. So one of the reasons why we've waited so long for the budget is the governor has been trying to accomplish those goals. I forgot the energy industry, but we don't need to talk too much about that. But the second is a problem that we knew about walking in, but the governor really had to confront within the first 6 weeks that he got into office, and that is a serious problem with our budget, where over the past number of years, it has essentially been cobbled together with, I like to say, with Band-Aids, but by essentially one-time revenue, things that will never recur again, gimmicks that really, over the course of time, leave a budget just out of balance, out of whack. It's like, taking your family budget and trying to pay for it with a side job that you might get once. And, well, many of us do that, but on a state budget, you can't do that for too long. And the budget in the year that we just passed had about $2 billion in these budget gimmicks or one-time funding sources. That was almost 10% of the budget. Almost 10% of the budget was something that had to be made up just to be able to just to be able to stay even. So this will show you a little bit about both in the 14-15 budget, but also in the budget that the governor vetoed, how reliant it was on sort of the same old way things are done in Harrisburg. It's been really, I think, kick the can down the road on a lot of different issues. And the first one the governor wanted to tackle is, we can't do this. We can't do this with the budget anymore. We can't use fund transfers. We have an equipment loan fund program that that money was taken out of to fund the budget, and so much money was taken out of that fund that they couldn't even pay back the loans that were taken out against it. So it left that fund in dire straits. One-time revenues, all sorts of one-time things. Moving forward payments. Instead of making a payment when it was due, if you move it forward, your June payment into July, then you can reduce your budget. Well, eventually, and we've done this not for small amounts, but for more than $300 million. So imagine having to make up $300 million, two $300 million payments in the next year. And then we've got questionable savings. And we had one of the reasons why the governor vetoed the liquor bill and the pension bill as part of the budget is that the current year budget would have been built on savings from those two things that we really did not think were real. And we can debate the policy, and that's one thing. But on the other hand, you can't build a budget based on speculation. You've got to build it on what you think is going to be real revenue. I know this is really boring, but this is what we do at the budget office. We do really boring things, which is try to make sure that we don't, frankly, that we can provide services, that we can make payments, that we don't suffer from bond downgrades that increase our costs. And yet all of those things we've had to deal with this year, unfortunately. So really what the debate has been about is coming to grips with whether we're going to have new revenue. And there were a variety of proposals out there. Putting a severance tax on natural gas, for example, was one that the governor has advocated for and will continue to advocate for. But let me help you to understand why our current impact fee is just not cutting it. Pennsylvania was the 20th largest gas producing state in the country. We're now number 2. We are the only one of the large gas producing states that has no severance tax. If you are in Louisiana, they have a severance tax on oil and gas. but they also export sand and shells, and so they have severance taxes on those as well. Alaska has a severance tax on wood and fish, because the notion is that while there are individuals who will profit from the sale of these these are also resources that belong to the state, and that those who are using them should pay something to the state, particularly for the non-renewable resources. So we'll compare Pennsylvania and North Dakota. Pennsylvania has about $12.7 million, and our impact fee in 2014 raised $224 million. North Dakota, 637,000 people, they raised $3.4 billion with their severance tax. So you don't have to pay taxes for anything. I mean, nobody else has to pay taxes because their severance taxes are just so high. I mean, it's a big source of revenue during the booms. It's also a volatile source of revenue, so you don't want to depend on it, but it certainly has its place in your group of taxes. So this is why we need it. We don't want more cuts to education. We don't want to continue to underfund human services. We have people who are working in group homes or in various human service programs who are on food stamps because they don't make enough money to basically pay their own way. And while they're mission driven and labors of love, we're not really paying them what they're due for the very difficult work that they do. Don't want to increase local property taxes. I mean, that's the reality. If we're not paying for things in Harrisburg, then you're paying for them here. And we don't want to have additional bond downgrades. We had 7 bond downgrades in 2014. We were one of only 3 states to get our bonds downgraded. So here's the good news. We have a budget agreement. There are still areas where there is no agreement, but on basic issues, there is some agreement. The first is there's an agreement to begin to address the structural deficit. We haven't wiped it out, we haven't solved it, but we've taken if it's enacted, take very positive steps to address the structural deficit. The proposal that is agreed to so far in the framework would triple the current amount of property tax relief that people are receiving within 2 years. So much more than we see right now. We would reform the pension system. We'd move, frankly, this is a historic and popular for some people and not popular for others, proposal to change our public pensions from a defined benefit plan to something called a side-by-side hybrid. So essentially it would have elements, there would be a portion of it that's a regular defined benefit pension, but then there would also be mandatory, and as part of the whole package, a 401k type package, 401k type plan that the employer and the employee would invest in. And it will have, the proposal that we have right now, we believe will save money, and I'll talk about that in a second, but will also provide sufficient replacement income for the employees who will be working under that plan. And then the budget will restore cuts to county programs. So this is what we have in property tax relief. And here's the balance, and maybe where there are differences and disagreements, but the governor believes that you can do property tax relief and you can strengthen schools, and that you can't do one without the other, and you certainly can't do one at the expense of the other. We've got to be able to make property taxes more fair and easier for people to pay and not shortchange schools. The plan would double to $1.3 billion next year and $2 billion in 2017, and it would be paid for with an increase in the sales tax to 7.25%. So it's about a 1.25% increase in the sales tax. How that's going to be distributed hasn't been determined yet. That is going to be, I think, the topic of the meetings that are going on this week. As I said earlier, the governor believes that property tax relief should be a core component of what you're doing to support the revitalization of third-class cities and boroughs and communities that are working very hard to tax themselves, but with very little wealth. And not necessarily, and there are other folks who frankly would like to direct property tax relief to those communities that have high property taxes because it's part of who they are. There are, as you know, there are a number of school districts that have high property values that people move into, and they expect that their kids are going to have everything. And so their folks there are paying increasingly high property taxes. And so one of the questions is, is that the area where you want to direct property tax relief where people can generally afford it, can afford to pay the taxes, or do you want to direct it at places where folks are having a harder time? So we have an agreement. From the governor's point of view, Senate Bill 76 is not going to be the solution to our problems. So I want to remind folks that there is only one state that has eliminated local property taxes for schools, and that's Michigan. That happened more than 20 years ago. And I can assure you that property taxes are unpopular everywhere, but Michigan remains the only state that has taken this approach. And so you have to ask yourself why. And frankly, the reason is that we've learned a lot from Michigan. But the proposal that we have is not one that's going to accomplish the dual goals of, allowing people to fairly to pay for their schools and and provide sufficient resources for our schools. So the big problem with Senate Bill 76, there are many problems with it. As you know, it will increase income tax, increase sales tax. It will broaden the sales tax to a number of different items. And, I can tell you the governor's plan to pay for, and this is where I think you should look at how people vote on this, because the governor's plan to pay for $3.8 billion in property tax relief included base broadening, included adding the sales tax to a number of different things that was verbatim from Senate Bill 76. And it was not a path that the legislature has wanted to take. So frankly, broadening the sales tax, applying it to other things, I agree with. I think it's a good idea. I think that in some areas our sales tax is too narrow. The General Assembly has not wanted to go along with that. So the big problems are 76 provides a cap on the growth of education funding in a way that seriously harms school districts' ability to pay for their bills. And that's a huge problem with the bill. It relies on sales and income taxes that are very very volatile. And it gives a big break to wealthy taxpayers. And it just is, and I didn't bring the numbers with me, but I ran them at one point, that if you eliminate property taxes, you're giving people who live in the Parkland School District about 4 times more relief than you're giving people in Allentown. And so you have to ask yourself, is that fair? Do you want to provide more tax relief for people in Parkland than in Allentown? So those are some of the reasons why that the governor is not for Senate Bill 76, but believes we really do need to find a way to address the property tax concerns that people have. So in terms of pensions, we're looking at $10.5 billion worth of savings. That's not an insignificant amount. That's about double what was saved through Act 120, which was the last property tax, pension relief bill. And I can tell you we're at the top right now for the state employee system, where the pension contributions have been going up like this. We're now at the point where they're leveling off. That will happen for schools next year, starting 16-17, where the growth is not going to be 10%, but it's going to be 2% or 2.5%. So we're almost there, but our proposal would, provide further savings over the next 20 years that will really help to take some of the pressure off of local school districts as well as the state. We are, have proposed really a historic compromise on the state liquor stores. It's a big system. The state stores generate about $2.34 billion in sales, so that's pretty significant. They bring in taxes of about, almost $500 million, $473 million, and provide about $100 million a year in income that goes into the general fund, that pays for state police, that pays for drug and alcohol. So it's a system. Not everyone doesn't, it's not a system that everybody likes. I don't think it's an evil system. Basically, what happened was after Prohibition, when states were given back control over their liquor systems, they had a choice to make about whether they wanted to have more state control or just have a license, sort of a license and permitting function. And so the states that had stronger temperance movements, the states that had, less tolerance for alcohol, created these control systems like Pennsylvania. States that didn't have the big temperance movements went to the different system. And so that's what we have. At the end of the day, it's not a perfect system, but it brings in a lot of revenue to the state. And so, we also, as states that have liquor control, have less underage drinking and fewer fatalities. But we've agreed that it's time to make some changes, and so the governor really wants to do two things. One is look at how do you lease that system so you get it out from under government control, and then what can we do to increase consumer choice? What can we do to make it easier to get a bottle of wine or a six-pack of beer? And so our proposals would do those things. So we're dealing with a budget impasse. So let me just say that it's been hard on everyone. I know this has been really difficult. It's been hard on school districts. It's been hard on counties. It's been hard on nonprofit organizations. I mean, every day people in our office are working to problem solve around, what can we do to address this impact. We're continuing payments for the most critical areas, healthcare, things for kids. We've been working with programs in school districts to help them acquire lines of credit or other things to help them get through the impasse. And we have a proposal in the budget to help reimburse counties or local human service providers and nonprofits for some of their borrowing costs, as well as school districts. And we are going to process the payments really quickly. I know a lot of people have been very concerned about how long it might take to process their contracts and payments, but those are all essentially in the queue, and once the budget is resolved, we'll literally be able to push a button and the payments will be made. So it's been pretty difficult, but we think that to accomplish the goals that the governor wants to accomplish, he had to be firm, and he indeed has. So this is what we'd like to do, really, work together for a sustainable budget that doesn't rely on gimmicks, that helps economic growth, that is supportive of education and human services, and where we can kind of come together and find those areas where we all agree that we can build a stronger Pennsylvania. So that's what I have. I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that wasn't too long, and take your questions. So and that's where you can find me.
Okay.
Oh, you're in charge.
Is this, okay. Again, if we can just ask, I don't know, maybe Gio will help me, but I'll cover one side or the other. You raise your hand like Otto's doing, I'll bring a mic to you, and then we'll use the mic so we can understand, and one question at a time. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Got a question. You talked about property tax relief. What guarantees does the governor put in there that within a few years we won't be back in the same boat that we're in right now? Like school districts raised them. Was there any proposals for a referendum or anything for school taxes?
So we already have that. I mean, if you talk to the school folks, what they will tell you is they Act 1 referendum requirement, you may not think that that makes a difference, but I can tell you, it's based on inflation. Inflation has been so low that with the escalating costs that school districts have, it's really been very difficult for them because they're raising taxes 1.9% or 2%. So it's been difficult. But yeah, the governor is, interested in continuing that and continuing to, the whole plan is a two-part plan. One is to provide local property tax relief. Actually, it's a three-part plan at this point. Provide local property tax relief so people's property taxes go down. That's number one. Number two is provide more state funding so that we don't have to rely so much on local property taxes. And it's number two. And number three is implement pension reform so that the pension costs at school districts that have been one of the drivers of school districts, costs begin to decline. So that's the plan. There is a referendum. They're looking at that referendum, at the referendum issue right now, and there might be some changes to it.
Are you going to you're going to do away with property tax? Are you going to make all that money up by the increase in the sales tax?
Well, so no, we're not going to eliminate property taxes. We are going to reduce them, and that would be done through the sales tax increase.
Okay.
Yep.
You mentioned about Michigan, but you avoided, how did they eliminate it?
Well, the story about that I heard was that they were fighting over local property taxes, and it was late at night, and the session was supposed to end. And if you've ever followed legislatures, if you ever watch C-SPAN or anything, you know that things can get really crazy at the end of the session and late at night. And somebody introduced, this is the story they told me, somebody introduced an amendment to eliminate property taxes, and people were so tired that they all voted for it. And then the next day they woke up and they were like, oh my God, what did we do? So that's the story they told. You think we should do the same, huh?
How you doing?
Hey.
We're fortunate to be in a county where we have a pretty conservative county commissioners. They have proceeded the third year in a row to cut our county taxes without cutting core programs and spending. The governor came into this position and immediately proposed probably the largest tax increase, I think probably that I can think of in the state history. Has anyone looked at ways of cutting and where we can cut fat and where we can retain things? Because I don't hear any of that.
So I think that's a really important point. And so, yeah, there are two things that are going on within the administration. One is the governor has made is an absolute serious commitment to I don't want to use the reinventing government term, but he's really committed to looking at everything in government and trying to make changes. So we have set a goal of $150 million in reduced spending the first year, and and trust me, because we're working on this in our office. It is actual dollars that are going to be that are cost avoidance or things that are going to be reduced. We are looking at modernizing things, using technology, trying to be more efficient. I can't even begin to tell you, but there are things in every system in government is being looked at. From why are we making copies of all of these things? Why aren't we scanning them and putting them, and instead of paying gigantic storage fees, storing images, doing document scanning? And so 5 departments wanted to do document scanning. Well, it turns out that the Department of Revenue has a gigantic, because they get a lot of paper, a gigantic scanning home, building. And so now we're in process of consolidating all of the scanning through the Department of Revenue and reducing all those costs for agencies and being more efficient. So they're doing that all over the place in government, giving people tablets so that instead of doing it, we do a lot of inspections, tons of inspections of all sorts of things, from agriculture to boilers to restaurants. Giving people tablets and sending them out in the fields where they can do their reports the way the private sector does. So instead of doing 3 days of inspections and 2 days of writing paperwork, you can do 5 days of inspections, and over the course of time, reduce the number of inspectors. All of those things we're looking at. On the school side, we're doing the same thing. One of the things that's happened over the past couple of years is there was a process in place to really help school districts think about their own consolidations of their services. What are things that they could do to help reduce costs and be more efficient? And we're in the process now of really documenting all of the things that have happened. But we have healthcare consortia, we have energy purchasing consortia, we've got copying consortia, we've got regular purchasing consortia, all of these things that are going to, try and be more efficient. So, I mean, I can assure you, and it's a really good question, why are we just spending money? No, we're really looking at trying to find ways to save money, do things more efficiently, and that as well, is gonna, I think, and spend dollars wisely. So I think all of those things we're working on. Yeah. It's a small percentage of the budget, and I'm not gonna, it's not even 1%, 0.5% of the budget. So we're getting there. We're starting, we're starting.
I'm going to give you 2 questions. The first thing is, it was in the paper about a couple of weeks ago that they're talking about giving each student in our school district a computer to take home. Okay? Now, I've used computers and everything, I'm still doing everything, and there's not going to be any cutting cost. Because if you give a kid, no matter what you're giving, a $75 or whatever it may be, or $200, when you got 400 or 500 students or something, okay? So there's no way, because you people can't control the school boards. And I'll give you another little example that's been in my cry, and it still will be, is the school bus system. East Penn has 439 parking spots right across from the school. They have not eliminated one bus. Tell Governor Wolf about that.
So I think both of those are issues. On the technology side, there are savings, and so I don't know what your school district's cost calculation was, but they buy books. So if you're not buying books, if you're using tablets, then you will have some cost savings there. And on the transportation side, it is something that's on the list. It's been very complicated, but that's a really important suggestion, and I will make sure that they hear it. Okay?
Yeah, just a quick question. If you're saying that we're going to look at things as far as cutting and all that other stuff, it's basically dollars and cents what you're looking at, does that translate into cutting personnel? Because if you're being that efficient, that means then you're not going to need as many people. And if you equate this with the private sector, you would be out of a job, would you not?
Me personally, or just everyone?
No, I'm just saying that if the efficiencies are such that you're saying that whether or not it was Corbett or Wolf or whoever comes afterwards, then what ends up happening is we've saved so much money that we've basically cut people. And that's what they do in corporate America. I
can tell you we have, just in terms of we have substantially reduced the number of jobs in state government. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I have to say it's about, I can tell you, I can send you that amount. It's got to be 20%. We've had significant reductions in what's called the complement. I know exactly in the budget book where it is, but I don't remember the exact number. But over the past 12 years, we've reduced the number of people that work for state government. Absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But you're right. Part of this is if we, the presumption is that if you give someone a tablet and they do 5 days worth of inspections rather than 3, that you don't need as many inspectors. So we absolutely believe that. I think maybe the difference is that in the private sector, some of those changes might happen more quickly in terms of people being laid off. But we will, as those positions, as what happens is when we're doing the budgets, if somebody doesn't need a position because of an efficiency, the position gets taken away. So, this is serious. The governor's serious about it. The budget secretary is serious about it. I can tell you some of the agencies that we're working with are not so happy about it. but it's what the governor believes needs to be done. People need to believe, and we need to demonstrate and prove that this is not talk, that this is the reality that we want to do. We want to provide the right level of services. We don't want to shortchange people. We want to pay our folks reasonably well, but we don't want to do things the way we've always done them. And he's got to come back to the taxpayers and come back to the voters and say, this is what I've done. And I can tell you, we're working very seriously on that. And I will find that and send it to you.
Sharon, I was disturbed with the governor's initial budget with the expansion of the sales tax into services and a whole lot of other categories. Has that been rolled back, and are basic necessities and more not subject to the sales tax with what they're talking about now?
Yes, so the governor's proposal, I should say, was everything was in Senate Bill 76 except for food, clothing, and prescription drugs. So we took those out.
From property tax.
Well, that's, I understand, I can appreciate that. So, but the leadership of the House, Senate, and the governor are not doing any of the sales tax expansion. So none of that's happening. It's just a straight increase on the sales tax on the base that we currently have.
Yeah, hi Sharon.
Hi.
According to the Commonwealth Foundation, 70% of all new tax dollars are going to the pensions. How can, well, and you know, the teachers that are retiring from East Penn are retiring at age 60 with about $2.5 million in pension. Cops are retiring at age 50 with about $3.5 million in pensions. And there's a lot of them. I'm a financial planner, and there are very few people that are retiring with the kind of pensions that we see our public officials. Now, you were talking about pension relief and a hybrid plan, but I also heard from the Commonwealth Foundation, read from the Commonwealth Foundation, that only covers the top 5%. So it looks as though you're just nibbling at the edges of the huge problem that we have, and the only problem that we have. What do you think about that statement?
Well, I don't think it's the only problem we have. I think most people would think that we have many other problems in Pennsylvania. But that said, it's an issue that requires attention. So I'll go in reverse order. We had proposed a pension plan that the Commonwealth Foundation didn't like, and we have compromised from that plan. So the one that we have now affects dramatically more folks and doesn't just affect the, and I don't want to go into what that was, but sorry. So we've, in order to get the budget done, the governor's had to compromise and tried to find something that protects replacement income but also saves taxpayers' dollars. I don't know anyone, I don't know who retires with a $2.5 million pension. I mean, what most people don't know is that for state employees, the average pension is $27,000. And for teachers in the retirement system right now, the average pension is about $38,000. So that, if you're talking, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of teachers and many retired teachers, and so the folks that get the big, golden parachute contracts, those make the newspaper, but other people retire, they don't get that. You also need to realize that there's a tremendous amount of turnover in the school districts. And you may not always see that, because you may see the teachers that you know for years, but beneath them, the average teacher lasts 5 years. So there's a group of teachers who may stay on, and frankly, that's good in many ways, because more experienced teachers are better teachers, but not every teacher that goes into that system is going to stay in that job forever. And, as things are more challenging, we're seeing even more turnover in the schools. So, but to get to your issue, and then I think you had another question there, but, so yeah, we're looking at, trying to get a handle on this. We're also working on the municipal side. There's a whole other group of people who are working to try and address, some of the issues with municipal pensions, because we understand that those are problematic as well. So we're taking this stuff really seriously. And, I do want to point out that people have been talking about liquor and pensions and, I remember what I wanted to say. Liquor and pensions and property taxes for years and haven't done anything about it. And with this budget, it's not perfect, but we are taking on pension and getting it done. We're taking on liquor and somehow something will get done on that. We're taking on property taxes. We haven't had property tax relief since 2003. We've not had 2006. It's been a long time since that's happened. So we're getting all of those things done. Now I remember what I wanted to tell you, which I do again. This is something that I hope that you will at least consider. One of the proposals the governor had this year was to take the line that's teachers' pensions and move it off the budget. Frankly, hide it, put it into what's called a restricted account. And the reason why we wanted to do that is that and the reason why the pension increases have been so high over the past couple of years was that for fully 10 years, the required pension contributions that Commonwealth was supposed to make was a giant slush fund, and the money got used for other things. And I'm going to be bipartisan about this. Under Ed Rendell, he used the money for schools. Under Tom Corbett, he used the money for tax cuts. So at the end of the day, the employer, think of your employer. Think of if your employer, you put your money in all the time and you thought your employer was matching your contribution, and then you find out he never made the contributions. That's what happened in Harrisburg. They spent the money on something and not pensions. And now, just like a credit card, if you pay the minimum balance on your credit card for years, you get a big balloon payment. And that's what we've been facing basically since 2010 is, the General Assembly is trying to do the responsible thing and make up those payments. That's why the big increases that we've seen are coming to an end, because we've caught up. And we were on track to catch up, but then we had the recession. And among the other horrible things that happened during the recession, it really tanked our pensions. So I answered your question.
Basically, I have 3 questions.
I got 6 answers for your 3 questions.
Okay. 3 questions. Number 1, Auditor General Jack Wagner pointed out that there's excessive fraud in the state. And right now, it's about $12 billion. And I have not seen Governor Wolf propose anything to cut that $12 billion worth of fraud. I would like to know why, because he did work in the Treasury Department. So he had to have access to this when this was brought up. My personal opinion on the budget, we don't need a $2 billion increase. We need about a $7 billion decrease. That's question number 1. Question number 2, when you talked about the schools needing more funding. Well, from 2000 to 2010, 35,000 students left the education system. The teachers hired and the schools hired 35,000 staffers. So during that period of time, the people in this room and all the taxpayers in the state was overtaxed. So why do we need to fund more money there now? And he wants $400 million more, when the last report I seen, there's $4 billion worth of reserves. Now, some of that could have been used up this year. But my district itself has a $33 million reserve. And that means they drastically overtaxed me. The question about the pensions is this. 2001, when the bill was passed, the legislators approved the fact that they could put more money in high-risk investments. It went from 2% to no ceiling. By the time the crash happened, the pensions had 46% in high risk. They took a major bath. And just last year, DePasquale said, don't put any more money in there. And the SCRS dumped another $100 million in there. So why should we be responsible for what the government has done and the legislators are not stopping?
You are a rather informed audience, I have to say. All right, so let's start from the beginning. Let's start with the fraud. So Auditor General Jack Wagner had many good qualities, and he did a very good job. He really overstated the fraud issue. After that report came out, there was an Inspector General report. They went back through and they identified $130 million that they found. The General Assembly, the Republican Policy Committee, went around the state and they looked around they had hearings all across the state, and they looked around for people to come and talk about fraud that they found in the welfare system. They had one person actually come and testify about a case of welfare fraud, and the only reason why they knew about that case of welfare fraud because the Inspector General had found the welfare fraud. So we just looked at the Inspector General's budget yesterday. But we've got a serious Inspector General. They have a whole welfare fraud division. Let me also talk about why I don't like the use of the word fraud. Because what you have and there are a number, actually there's a bill that the Speaker or the Majority Leader of the House is sponsoring to deal with the weirdness of the benefit system. If you get a job that pays X and you're supposed to get this benefit, whatever it is, say it's food stamps, and then you get an increase, then you're supposed to get less. And there's a reconciliation process. But sometimes, the question is, if somebody gets an increase in their wages, they go till their 6-month redetermination, and then the change is made. So it can be very hard because there are constantly changes that people are having. They have, a lot of people who are, for example, on food stamps, work jobs where they don't have a 40-hour week because of their employment, or they may work 40 hours one week and 10 hours the next week. And so their benefit changes can be very complicated. So the question is that fraud? No, it is people report the changes and then the changes get made. So that's welfare. Your other question was on the reserves. So the governor totally agrees with you on the reserves and is looking at that issue. We are actually looking at that. Many school districts have gone through their reserves at this point and really have relied on their reserves to get through the budget impasse. But the governor agrees. We've proposed for charter schools that they have a cap of 4% of unassigned fund balances, and that they return the money to the state. And I know there are conversations going on to deal with the unassigned fund balance issue. And then there was a third question in there that I missed. What was that one? Fund balances, welfare fraud.
To the pensions.
Oh, pension investments. Yeah, it would be fair to say that the governor is very interested in and has been talking to CSRS and PSRS about their investments. We think that they're paying way too much in management fees. We want to reduce the management fees, and really do want to take a look at their mix in their investment portfolio. The guy who handles debt in my office totally agrees with you. He totally agrees with you. They will argue, as they did, that they had a banner year last year. So and again, it's a problem. But I can assure you that all of that particular issue, all of the investment issues, are ones that are on our radar screen and we're working on, and would like to get something done on.
I would like to go back to the welfare just a minute. I have talked to people that work inside the welfare office who is processing these claims, and they are told to shut their eyes and authorize. This came from Rendell. I did read Jack Wagner's report. I did do checking with the welfare department, and the fraud is at least 15 to 20%. And I could almost guarantee you that everybody in this room go into the store, see these people coming out with carts fulls, and these people are paying for it. And if they're getting money that they're not supposed to have, that isn't fraud, that is legalized theft.
If people are getting money that they shouldn't have, then that should be stopped.
Right. And actually the head of the welfare department said to Wagner, that is not our job to check for fraud. Our job is to issue the money. And that is wrong.
I don't think I don't believe that that's the way. We have a very large compliance system, and it's pretty rigorous, and so they spend a lot of time verifying people's information. So, but, okay. Appreciate
Okay?
that.
Now, I want to go back to the pensions. Why is there no authorization? There's no oversight. I had talked to Wenzel, head of the Banking Commission and the Security Exchange Commission, and there is no oversight at all on what these pension funds do. They're wasting money, high risk. You mentioned the management fees. Well, it cost the taxpayers over the last 10 years, if that money would have been invested, over $10 billion, yet alone the high risk. In the last 2 years, the Peasers lost $4.9 billion just on the high-risk venture capital investments. And they did not have a banner year. I'm also in financial planning, and I've also studied this actually since 2009. They need to fix this problem, but also the people, the taxpayers, need to get a break, because as far as I'm concerned, all the legislators, I don't care if you talk Democrat, Republican, they're getting financially raped.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next question.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I would like to sort of suggest about the state stores. The government is trying to license privilege to a few people. They should give that up, and they should offer anybody who wants to open a store that sells alcohol a license, and the only fee the state would get would be the license and whatever taxes they assigned to the liquor. And I drove 47 years ago for the Philadelphia Yellow Cab Company. They had the privilege of having an unlimited number of licensees to drive the cabs in Philadelphia or within a 25-mile radius thereof. There were only 143 independents. There was no reason for the state to give a company the privilege of who will drive and where they will drive, rather than let the citizens decide whether they will be in business for themselves. So it's my suggestion that the government get out of the state liquor business, but not to license it to a few privileged people, but rather to license it to anybody who will pay for a license. Not with territories, not with licenses, just whether they like to pay for my driver's license. You got one and I got one. We both paid for it. It's not one privilege against another. So my suggestion is that you ask them whether they would think they should really get out of the state liquor business. I don't propose they give up their taxes, although I would actually suggest they would. But I think that it's important that they quit trying to hold control of that which is a business for private enterprise. Should not be licensed by the state.
On the slide, I think it mentioned that there was undetermined how the education funding was going to be distributed.
Yes.
So there was, I believe, a Fair Funding Commission. I don't know if I have the right name. They spent at least a year going around, taking input. They came up with a formula. So why is it still undetermined?
There were two proposals. The governor had a proposal that we included in the budget that would distribute funding in a way that would rectify what were some imbalances in restorations or imbalances in cuts. The cuts that occurred over the past number of years did not occur equally. There were some school districts that got substantially more, some school districts got substantially less. So rather than locking in those inequities, that one school district started here and the other one started here in terms of where they were, we're trying to, as best as we possibly could, to level that. So the proposal was do that the first year and then implement the funding formula, the commission's funding formula the following year. So they're discussing that right now. There are a number of proposals that are under discussion that would blend the two of them and then move towards the formula, the commission formula for next year. So there have been lots of conversations, and I think that's one where we're closer to an agreement. But thank you for raising that, because it's a very important, how you distribute those funds is very important.
I got a question here.
Okay.
Actually, I have several questions. I have a lot of questions, but I know we're limited time-wise. I have, since the crash, woken up to what's going on in government. And I keep hearing restore cuts in education. And I've looked at the funding over the last several years, and I'm trying to figure out where the funding's been cut. Can you answer that? Because I know what you're going to say, and I want to...
Okay.
Tell me where the funding's been cut.
So there were education cuts that were made in 2011, and basically they came from two places. About half of the cuts came when federal funds to education that came during the recession went away.
TARP money, one-time deal.
No. Well, it's ERA money. So it was
TARP
quite
money, one-time deal.
Not TARP, but ERA. That's okay. So that was about half of it, and then the rest of the cuts came from the elimination of 3 particular programs that were completely state funded. There was a reimbursement that went to school districts to help defray some costs of charter schools. There was a tutoring program, and there was one other thing that I can't remember right now. So those funding streams went away, and so that meant that the checks that went out to the school districts were lower than 2011-12 than they had been in 2010 and 11. And so the school districts then had to determine ways to make up for those cuts.
So the school districts counted on this one-time deal money, and now they're complaining because it went away, and they don't want to lose it, they want to get it again. Tom Corbett raised education funding. This current legislature in this budget put a proposal together that raised education funding. And I'll tell you, I've been an engineer, I've been in American manufacturing for 30 years. I have not hit a 6-figure income. I'd love to. You're hurting, what's going on is hurting the majority of this country. There's a minority group that is getting a benefit that is a burden on the majority. And what I'm trying to, and I've written to Governor Wolf and not gotten a satisfactory answer back, but what I look at and what I try to propose is what is best for the community as a whole. And I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing that in this budget.
Okay, so in terms of, I know that there's been a debate going on about whether there were cuts in education. But when it came to the check that went to the school district, the school districts got less money. Now, some of the school districts anticipated that the one-time money was going to be lost, and that's one of the reasons why they had reserves. Because, again, if you cut the money from the state or from the federal government, then it has to come from somewhere. And I think you all saw that school districts made really significant cuts to the programs and services that they had. Now, there were increases in education funding, but again, those were increases to pay for pensions. So I can appreciate the fact that one way to look at that is the total amount of dollars that went to education went up because the funding that went to pensions went up. But the funding that went to the kids who are currently in the classroom did not go up. That funding went down.
That's the shame of it. It's not going to the kids. It really is. Now I have another question. Has the governor looked at the volume of people that have left this state in the last several years versus the amount that have moved into the state? Is he looking at that history, that cycle?
Pennsylvania is a state that nobody leaves and no one comes into, and that's just kind of the bottom line. Let me tell you that what you have here about people coming into the state is the exception and not the rule. There are a few counties bordering New Jersey and bordering Maryland where there's an in-migration, and Pittsburgh is doing okay, and other than that, There's no in-migration, population is declining. So what we have is sort of a tale of two states. We have the areas of the state that are growing and the areas of the state that are not. The areas of the state that are growing have different problems. And they have, you know, housing developments, more infrastructure needs, more all of those things. But you know, policymakers in Harrisburg want to see growth. One of the arguments that everyone makes is that we'd like to see growth. We want more people coming into the state. So it does have a cost associated with it, there's no doubt. So what was your question? Yes, we have some people moving in, but not a lot.
I'm saying, the numbers that I read, that there's a vast majority leaving the state.
We don't have many people leaving Pennsylvania. What we do have is a very aging population, And we don't have much in terms of in-migration to help. I mean, the nation is aging as a whole, but certainly Pennsylvania is the second, maybe the third oldest state in the country. Yeah, you know, we're not looking enough at the demographic issues, but I agree with you. I think it's something that we should do.
Yes, I've got a question. Now you can hear me.
Yeah.
I got several things to say. First of all, I've read, within the last year or so, I've read that there's a report, obviously was generated somewhere in the state, that in the last decade, we've lost 9 to 10 million people to a cost of about 10 billion to the Treasury.
No, we had, our population was very flat at around 2.7 million, and we've gone up slightly, but it's been very, very flat.
Well, I guess we're going to go up with all of Syrian refugees that the governor wants to take in. But anyway, I'd like to move on. You'd mentioned Act 1 in the referendum. A lot of us who follow school districts' activities consider that referendum vehicle in the law a fraud, because we don't see it, because there are so many exceptions that the school district can get around. So we see our taxes continue to rise. Now, you talked about tax relief, which I raised a question with you earlier. If the governor would hook Act 909, it's a proposal, I believe it's in the House, that would put a real referendum on any additional tax increases. Because let's face it, if the district and the parents want to see education increase because there's a need, they'll approve a referendum. But this way, at least we can put a lid on the runaway expenses right now. Because quite frankly, I didn't live in my house for 40 years, pay on it, retire, only to have my house be used for the state's retirement plan.
And as far as children leaving the state, I've had 3. They're all gone. 2 are in Florida, no taxes, low taxes. The other one, not so lucky. She's in Illinois, but she's in a good section of Illinois. Unfortunately, she doesn't agree with what's going on either. But at the same time, what is the dropout rate in Pennsylvania? At one time, this used to be one of the most respected states for education. In the last 25 years, I've seen it disappear. My children finished their education because of a job that the family had in Florida. And the education they got down there surprised the hell out of me. They had more resources, and they knew they had the districts were by counties, not like the 500 that are in Pennsylvania. And the streamlining that did alone in administration could save billions. Possibly it's time that Pennsylvania started looking at something new when it comes to education. Also, the old-fashioned way of teaching, let's face it, with all the technology, needs to be changed. So is this something that the state's looking at all?
So a couple of comments in there. I mean, one is that based on the performance of our students on standardized tests, Pennsylvania is still a very high-performing state. We are. Our schools do a good job. We are much better. We're generally within the top. No. It depends. Not on the statistics that we use, which is the National Center for Educational Statistics, and they rank students based on the state report cards, just like we have school report cards and things like that. And so, and I can appreciate your other comments. And yes, we are looking at, there's work going on to look at how you integrate technology, how you do hybrid learning. So yeah, all of those things are happening. So we're trying not to be averse to technology, but to be kind of embracing of it and to moving to new modes. In terms of school district consolidation, that's a hard issue. It really is. And so what we've tried to do is to encourage the school districts to get the efficiencies where they can. And again, that's another priority that we're going to continue to work on.
I just want to make a comment about the out-migration. When I first heard that, the way I verified it is I went to the Treasury Department to find out how many less taxes were filed in the state of Pennsylvania. Now, if these people aren't moving out, something's happened with the tax returns. But the question I have about Wolf's school tax bill, when Rendell passed the gimmick with the casino money, we're going to get this great break. Since that happened, the state school taxes went up 40%. Now, what is in his bill to stop that from happening if this happens again? Because I believe this is a scam.
Well, again, we're trying to attack it from a number of different ways. Property tax relief, more state funds for education, reducing pension costs. And we've got Act 1, and they're looking at potentially making changes to Act 1. So that's what, I think people have heard the concern and are trying to address it in a way that doesn't hurt the kids. And that's what we're trying to do. It's a balancing act.
So this partial tax, property tax, let me think. In the total elimination, I think that lawyers get taxed, accountants get taxed, magazines and books get taxed. Are those part of the expansion in the reduced property tax?
No, that's sales tax-based expansion.
I wonder why.
It's not that we didn't try. It's not that we didn't try.
So how bad would it be if you totally eliminated the property tax? You did that expansion, the full expansion without the food. The food is only up to $50, or the clothing is only up to $50. The food is, fresh produce and all of that, that's good. And then if you use the total elimination and you went right to the distribution based on the Basic Education Funding Commission, why would that not work?
Well, I don't know where to start, but so just to reiterate, and again, it's the way the bill is written. It expands the sales tax to cover a whole bunch of things. Same things that the governor put in his proposal. General Assembly hasn't supported that. Didn't pass the House. We'll see what happens in the Senate. But the reality is that the way the bill is written, it's going to make cuts to schools. And I think that it is. That at the end of the day, they're not going to have the resources, and frankly, they're not going to have the growth that we think they need as technology changes, as more kids come in with disabilities that we're dealing with in the schools. One of the big areas of growth, that was one of the questions that came over here, I forgot to answer. One of the issues around the growing costs of education is that we are spending a lot more money with kids with disabilities. So costs are going up. There are some things that we can't control, some things that we do because it's the right thing to do. And the way the bill is written, people are worried that it's going to cut the schools It's going to be too volatile, and ultimately, whether or not the sales tax base expansion that's in 76 gets enough support, is going to determine whether or not the bill gets passed, and that one's going to be very hard.
Someone had mentioned the refugees, which prompted my question, Sharon. I just last week researched and read a lot about the illegal immigration in Pennsylvania alone. Pennsylvania is 16th nationally of the collection of illegals. Currently, we have almost 300,000 in the state. In our public schools, we have almost 95,000, which we are paying $1.7 billion for. Now, these people are here illegally. These are legal tax dollars going into this fund. $1.7 billion, I would assume, would give our legal students a lot more didactical attention, not to mention just overall better benefits, supplies, classroom, the whole bit. So, I know in reading the webpage on the DOE, there's all the qualifications for enrollment that a legal student has to go through. They have to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. Except in illegal, they don't have to do anything because it's just simply illegal to not allow them in a public school. So while the taxpayer side of it is under the gun, the illegal side of it is shooting the gun, and we're paying. So what are we going to do about that?
I have to say that's not an area that I know very much about, but I can find out more.
Well, but it goes toward this school property tax bill that we are all paying, which constantly goes up. The illegal immigration in and of itself constantly goes up, which inevitably is going to make the price go up, the costs go up. And right now, the targeted people that own a home or property are the ones paying for all this. Whereas, if we would eliminate this tax, go with the 76 bill, which spreads the tax across the state to everyone, at some point, illegals will buy something and pay sales tax on it, so at least they're contributing a little bit. As it is now, they're contributing nothing. And they're getting everything.
People who are undocumented pay income taxes. And
yes,
they pay sales
they
taxes.
paid a total, I looked that up, they paid $149 million last year to the state of Pennsylvania. You just said that is minuscule because that's what you were looking at as a cost cut. What they pay doesn't buy a pencil with an eraser on it when you compare it to the whole picture.
Thank you. All right, thank you. All right, last question. Yeah, I gotta go. Make it a good question.
Turn the light off.
Oh, okay. Is it on?
No. Keep talking. No. Turn the light off. Now speak into the microphone.
Okay. Oh, there we go.
Yay.
Okay. Education costs. This PA Core Standards, which is Common Core, we are connected to the federal government. I've been down to the Department of Education. They've lied to my face saying we don't collect data, we don't do this. We do. But part of the expense, this is costing a fortune, and the taxpayers are footing the bill. And the testing that we have going on and on and on is a huge part of this cost. And that's another thing, that it's detrimental to the kids. No one who is a teacher or knows children, we do need some documentation. And this doing it 2 and 3 times because you're not passing. And then they need tutorial time in between, and they're losing out on the regular classroom times. And the cost for people and teachers just to do that, and the loss of what these children are learning, which is kind of in the plan anyway. They don't want them to be too smart in this country anymore. And it's very sad, and it's much too expensive for what we're getting for it.
So, I mean, the governor agrees with you. He thinks we do too much testing. He doesn't want to do as much testing. So, I don't know what the plan is to move away from reliance on standardized tests, and, you know, but I know that's a goal that he shares. All right.
Okay, Sharon, you said that was the last question?
Yeah.
Too bad. Oh, well. If we could all give a hand to Sharon, I'm glad that she was able to make it. It's very nice when we can get our elected officials out here, especially one that's that close to the governor. So don't forget, you can always call them up too and ask questions and spread the word or whatever. Sharon?
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks. Thank you all.
And I wanted to, and I had forgot this in the heat of the moment to get this thing going, to say like a moment of silence if we could have actually for the people over in France that just got decimated in this last terrorist attack. If we could just take a minute to contemplate that. Thank you very much, and let's hope that doesn't happen anymore. Again, Sharon, thank you very much. If you can spend a minute or two in the back, if people wanted to meet you or anything, it would be appreciated. Okay, there's tea, coffee, goodies in the back for everyone. Enjoy.
Can I make a quick statement?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to make a quick statement before you all leave. If you're really interested in the pensions and fixing the pensions, John McGinnis has just written a book. Honey, John McGinnis has just written a book, and it's called Future Forsaken: Pen Scam and the Demise of the Commonwealth. You can get it off the computer, or you can order it through Amazon. This will fix the pensions. And the other thing I want to mention to you is this. House Bill 1400 will fix 70% of the pension problem.
All right, thank you, sir.
You can just Google it.
You can read it on, or you can read it on the computer. I printed it.